Hi, everybody. Welcome to the September 2nd, 2016 edition of Colorado Inside Out, a special web exclusive production here on Channel 12. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Let's get a quick take on an initiative focused on allowing private pot clubs failing to make the Denver's November ballot this week. Meanwhile, a measure that would allow for social marijuana use in everyday businesses will appear on the Denver ballot. Patty Cahoon from Westward, you are our resident expert for everything Denver and everything pot. So, did you expect both ballot measures to make it? And from the one that did, what do you think about its chances in Denver?
I'm actually surprised they both didn't make it, just given how popular pot can be or how libertarian most people in Denver are. Live and let live. That said, I think the one that made it is going to be very, very interesting just because they take so much into account what neighbors want. You know, when bars are opening around town, they often have to have good neighbor agreements with the neighborhood association on times that they're open, on loudness of music if they're having that. So I think this is a good compromise for, you know, since smoking has been such a big issue in the city, it's a good compromise to just make sure the neighborhoods are comfortable with what might be happening. Think about it like alcohol.
David Kopel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. As Patty mentioned, there's a part of this that says if it's going to happen, you have to get neighborhood group approval. Is that a good move for kind of improving relations, or does that give neighborhood groups a little too much power?
Well, speaking on behalf of my late father, Jerry Kopel, I would say it's good for the neighborhood groups to be involved. He was a co-founder of something that was called, at the time, the Park Hill Action Committee. You know, now it's called like Greater Park Hill, but the Action Committee had two major things it did. One, which was fight for integration and against real estate practices to frighten all the whites into selling because there was a black moving it into the block. And secondly, they would go to the public hearings and oppose tavern licenses in Park Hill. So the way you have, I think, the most and in the context of marijuana, which was approved by the voters as a constitutional amendment, with the understanding that this is going to be very strictly regulated. It's not going to be, you know, like a auto repair place or in any other kind of business. This is going to be in its own unique high regulation category, and they proved it with that. And so saying that some neighborhoods are not going to want it and some will. And I think it's right to work with have a situation where you work with the neighborhood groups. And it's also true that we have so many out-of-towners buying these products. We should have some place where they can use it safely. And frankly, you know, you have people like Maureen Dowd who went into her catatonic trance because she ate too many edibles. It would actually be kind of good to have people doing it in a more social environment when they say, oh, you know, I'm thinking like, what if we're just like some giant is having a dream and we're not real and I'm going to have a panic attack. There's somebody else there they can talk to about that and help bring them down.
Eric, anxiety-ridden use of marijuana notwithstanding, do you think Denver's ready for movements like this? It seems that with all the different communities in Colorado, Denver's taking that lead with all the different stuff. Where do you think Denver is at when it comes to its vote this November?
I'm going to be curious to see how this one comes out. I actually am surprised that both of them didn't make it, and that really has very little to do with the pot issue. It's just that ballot access in Denver is relatively easy, and so I'm just surprised that they didn't qualify both of these with easy ballot access. I have a theory, and I'll acknowledge my theory may well be wrong, because I think Patty's ultimately right that Denver's both liberal and libertarian when it comes to these issues. But I have a theory that pot is going to be somewhat like Tabor, which is people bought the initial idea of it. And in this case, the initial idea of legalizing pot, regulating it like alcohol. But then, as with Tabor, when Doug Bruce in those early years kept coming back every couple of years to try to go Tabor version 2, Tabor version 3, and tighten the screws even more, the voters said, no, we'll go with the original, but we're not going to expand and expand and expand it. My theory, again, 50-50, I'm right, wrong, is that pot might be the same way, that we're willing to legalize it, but we don't want to further encourage what is already abundant use of it. And we shall see how this turns out in a couple months.
Penfield Tate, attorney at QTAC Rock, also a former state lawmaker. This caveat in this particular issue that says you have to get neighborhood approval, neighborhood group approval, is that something you think that most voters will say, well, that's at least a cap on it, so you can't just run rampant. Is that going to help it cross the finish line among Denver voters?
I don't know because I somewhat share Eric's perspective. I think everybody was fine with legalizing medicinal and personal use, but I don't know if they necessarily want to legalize having marijuana clubs or cafes. It's sort of in recognition of Jerry Copel David's dad. I mean, Park Hill Action and Greater Park Hill, that tradition in terms of neighborhood activism in Denver still exists. There's the restaurant in Park Hill, Cherry Tomato, had to negotiate a good neighbor deal before it could get its liquor license. They actually hired counsel to negotiate with Greater Park Hill in the neighborhoods so that people wouldn't show up and protest the granting of a liquor license to a restaurant. We're not talking about a tavern or a bar. This is a restaurant. So I think the neighborhood involvement is expected. I think it's appropriate. And I think it's going to be tough. I don't think this issue will go away until the proponents get the equivalent of bars in Denver where you can go someplace and ingest and imbibe in a setting that's not, your backyard or your front porch or your own house. So I think this issue is going to remain with us for a while. And some would argue that the city needs to allow more neighborhood input when it looks at some of the development that's occurring around the city. So it is not
crazy
yeah, it is not at all surprising. But I guess the final word I would say is, for the marijuana proponents, you want it to be treated and regulated in many ways like alcohol. Well, this is what happens to liquor license applicants in this city. Neighborhoods show up and protest, and sometimes you have to hire somebody to cut a good neighbor agreement before you can open your establishment.
That's all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.